Hi there. In this tutorial I'm going to go through the basic elements of how to make a scene something like this. I'm not going to create everything to the same level and spend a very long time on each element, because obviously there's a lot of detail in this scene and it does take quite a few hours to do all of that. I guess it's very much like some of my older tutorials where I'm doing a basic walkthrough on how to create a nature scene like this. So to begin with, we need to create our basic landscape. So we'll go to the 3D view and we'll add a plane. I'm just going to bring it to somewhere roughly where I want it. We'll make it about the size of the grid and then we'll subdivide it. We'll put a few subdivisions on it, not too many at the moment. And then I'm just going to select this middle area and just pull that down a little, because what I'm thinking is we're on one side of a bank and then there's the other side, of course. And now I'm going to select all the vertices and press W and subdivide again, but this time I've brought up the tool menu here and I'm going to increase the fractal element, and you see that gives us a sort of wobble, give us some slightly more realistic variation. Just going to turn off the grid now as it's getting in the way. We'll set this to smooth shading and we'll perhaps scale on the Z to increase that a little bit. Need to make sure that the edge over here is out of sight, so I'll just push it down a little bit. And then Control 2 to add a subdivision surface to give us a smoother look. I'm going to rotate it on the Z axis now and perhaps scale it up a little more. Just pushing it in and out a little. It's really just to get something interesting. Select all the vertices and just press U and unwrap it. It's a very simple shape. You may get a warning like this. If you don't like that warning, just come out of edit mode and Control A to apply rotation and scale, and then do it again and you won't get that warning. At this point I'm just going to give it basic material, which we'll call ground, make it a sort of mid-brown colour, and we'll put that into the viewport colour as well so we can see what we're doing. We're now going to add another mesh. This is going to be our water, and this will help define where our water is. While we're at it, we'll give that a water material, and logically we'll make that a little blue colour and drop that down so it intersects with the ground. And then we can think about where exactly our water is. And obviously as we raise it up, the banks become further apart. Have a look at that now. So that's quite wide. Perhaps want to move our ground over there a little bit, maybe even make it bigger. Obviously I want to see the bank on both sides. I'm just stretching it out slightly. So scale XX, scale on the X-axis, the actual, as it were, native X-axis. I'm just going to grab my camera and move it this way a little bit. And that's not too bad, bringing the camera closer to the ground. So I think that's quite interesting. The sort of the lake or river, whatever it is, seems to disappear there, so that's fine. And we'll just unwrap our water and make sure that plane is called water so that it's easy to find, and that one is called ground. So what we can do at this stage is to start to define where plants and things are going to be before we've got lots of other things in the scene. Now, because we haven't got very many vertices like that, it's going to be difficult to really narrow that down. We could just subdivide it, or I can just apply the subdivision surface, which I don't always want to do, but I will in this case, simply because it'll give us more geometry to play with. So I'm going to go into wireframe view. I'm in edit mode with the ground selected, press C, and I'm just going to select the vertices. I'm in vertex select mode that I can see and are just outside the camera view as well. Now this is going to select more than I actually need, so I'm now going to look from above, and I don't actually need to see, but I know that everything underneath here I don't need selected. So I'm holding the middle mouse button now and I'm staying just slightly away from the edge of the river and just marking that out there. So if I press Z now, you can see there's just a few vertices to remove in there. So now go to vertex properties, add a vertex group and assign it. We'll call that CamVis. Deselect everything and reselect there just to check that that's worked. So what we're looking at is this is the two areas of the bank that are visible to the camera. However, I actually want to separate these because anything that's over here is close to the camera and so needs to be reasonably high geometry, whereas things over here don't need to be. So I'm going to add another vertex group and I'm going to assign everything to that as well. But this one I'm going to call CamVis Distant. I'm in edit mode. I'm just going to remove the distant vertices and then click remove over here. If I remove everything now by pressing A and then click select, you can see we've just got the distant vertices. Now I'm going to come to this one, unselect everything, say select. So we've got both. This one I want to be the close vertices. So I'm going to remove the close vertices and then just say remove from there. Remove everything and click select. And so now you can see CamVis selects the close vertices, CamDistant selects the far ones. So we can see what we're doing. Now going to add simple sun lamp. I like to put it somewhere logical in the scene, even though it doesn't really matter where it is in the scene. And we'll have it about there. Slightly yellow colour for the sun. We'll put it at brightness of 5 and a size of 0.01. So it's quite small, which means the shadows will be quite sharp. I'm just going to set a simple sky, which will be a light blue sort of colour with a normal strength of 1. So if we have a look at that, there it is, very basic scene. So at this point, let's just put some basic texture on the ground. So that's the simple node setup we've got there. I'm going to remove the diffuse and I'm going to add shader, which is the principled shader. I'm going to connect that into the surface. We're going to look from the top at the moment, and I'm also going to move the water to the next layer just to get it out of the way. I'm now going to add texture, which is an image texture, and I'm going to select these leaves to start with and apply those. So we connect the colour into the base colour on the principled shader. If I just go to material, we can see what that looks like, and obviously that's much too large. So if we open a new window, go to the UV image editor, open our ground texture, and then go into edit mode and select all the vertices, you can see our whole plane is just barely covering the image. So the obvious thing to do is to make that bigger, which I've now done, but there is a problem. So we've got a leaf covered grass there, but obviously I think it needs to be even bigger than that, so we'll go even bigger. And there's other ways of doing this, by the way, perhaps not quite that big. Something like that. But you can probably see already, even here, relatively close up, there's a certain amount of the edges of that image being visible. It's not too bad in some respects. Obviously when we look at it like this you can see them. So we're going to do a little trick to minimize the impact of that. So I'm going to add another image. I'm just going to swap over to that other image, and I'm going to select a different ground texture this time. So we'll try one where there's just a few leaves on grass. So there it is, and that's fine in terms of scale. But again, you can see these hard edges where the edge of the texture is. So what we need to do is really swap between those two in a random way. And we can do more than two, of course. We could do multiple ones. And this may not be the best texture to have selected because of the density of the grass on here, but let's see how it goes. So I'm going to add a texture, which is a noise texture. So I'm just going to put that straight into there at the moment. And you can see noise textures by default are color, but I can use the factor output to ignore that. So Blender's making an assumption on the mapping of this texture, but just to be sure that it's using the right one, we'll add a texture coordinate and we'll take the UV out there and put that into the vector. And you can see that's sort of taken away all that stretching. But while we're at it, let's have a look at what these are like. So good, that's not made any difference to those. It's only really the noise texture by the looks of things that affects. Hold the shift key down and then left click and drag to create a little node like that. So back to our noise texture. That's a little fine, so let's try and go back to 5, and now we'll add a color ramp. And what this is basically going to do is switch between those two textures. So I'm now going to add a color mix node, mix RGB. That's going to be controlled by that noise. We're going to put our two images, one on each side, and then we can play with the color ramp to determine which image is visible at what point. You can see I've got basically all leaves up here, and if I go down here, all grass. Now, as I said, I think that probably wasn't the best texture to select. If I take that out of there, that grass texture there, the grass is too dense. Doesn't look quite right. So we'll go for one that perhaps is more bare ground and grass, which isn't quite so extreme a difference. We take our noise back into there now. Try B-spline. B-spline is a sort of softer transition between one and the other. And these are quite noticeable lines, which is obviously causing a bit of a problem. The other thing that we can do, just turning that down a bit, I think these textures are basically the same size, which is also a problem. Yes, you can see they're both aligned perfectly there. If they were different size textures, this would work better, but what we can do is we can fake that. We can add a vector node, which is a vector mapping node, but I'm only going to put it into one side of this set of connections here. So that's basically the UV map as it goes into the image texture here. And I'm going to rotate it a little bit, and I'm going to rescale it a little bit. So there's a bit of rotation. there's a slightly different scale. Perhaps we'll go that way. So now, they're not too different, but they're a little bit different. The idea is that the lines are not lined up now. So we've got a line, a harsh line there. If I turn this all the way down, the line for that one is a slightly different place. Possibly need to play with the scale on this one as well. And we should find, if I turn that to the middle, we should find we can move those around a little bit. So there we go. The lines are in different places now. So let's control that with our random again. And I think we'll go to ease for our method. Obviously the lines are still there. You're never going to get rid of them completely. But you can see you can start to adjust just how visible they are. And it adds a different pattern to sort of deceive the eye as to what's continuous and what isn't. It's important that the two images don't completely line up. There's still a slight evidence of the lines there, but that doesn't matter because we've got more particles and what have you to go on top of that. And then what I think we would probably want to do is put a gamma node on this side perhaps, turn it up just to get a somewhat darker ground, perhaps turn the roughness up a little bit, but also we need to add some texture. So I'm just going to take out all the texture on here for a moment. I'll just set this to sort of slightly darker grey. So I'm going to add another colour ramp. We'll just move this over here a little bit, and we'll take our colour output, put it into our colour ramp. Just move these points back to either side. I'm going to add a vector node, which is a bump node, and the colour output goes into one side of there from that colour ramp. And then the output of that colour ramp goes into the normal input over here. And immediately you can see we've got some texture appearing. Go back to B-spline for this one now, I think. And all I'm really doing here is selecting what parts of the texture are being used to create bump. So at the moment it's probably using the lighter parts, so I can either swap over my colour ramp or just invert the bump, and that turns it round. Strength is probably too high at the moment. And then put my colour back into here, into base colour on the principled shader. And I think we'll turn the specular down a bit and the roughness up. So there's our basic ground. So now we're ready to create some trees. So I've been through this before, cover it again, make a bit of space, and we'll add a curve. This does require that you have the sapling add-on enabled. So to do that, go up to File, User Preferences, and make sure Add Curve Sapling Tree Gen is enabled. So add Curve Sapling Tree Gen. Don't make any changes by right-clicking or anything to this tree until you're happy with it, because all the options will disappear as soon as you do that. So click Bevel and the tree becomes a bit more visible. And I'm going to just load a preset. You can make your own presets, there are some there already, but basically it's worth creating a preset because you can then easily create variations. So I'm going to load, let's say, this one, and I'll just very quickly go through it. Leaves will be created right at the very smallest twigs. So you can see we don't necessarily have twigs which would have leaves on yet. So make sure you go up to splitting and you've got enough levels. So let's go up to 3 levels. This is going to be our high resolution close trees. So that's quite a few more twigs. Each row of numbers relates to a different level. So that first row relates to the main trunk and then all the branches and twigs which follow. I'm not going to go into this in detail again. I've covered that on a number of other tutorials, but that's just the principle of how it works. You can play around with this until you get a tree that you like the look of. You can obviously play with the radius, so that's going to be how thick the branches are. The growth, obviously this is how long the branches are, and in this case perhaps I want to reduce some of those branches, particularly that level. And then you can use pruning if you want to control the shape of the tree more, but I'm going to go straight to leaves now. I'm just going to reduce this to 10 for a moment before I add the leaves, and I'm going to set this to rectangular, and that's because I'm just going to use these leaves as a means to project my image texture of a leaf rather than forming a leaf themselves. So click Show Leaves and here they are. So that's not too bad, they're perhaps a little big, but then again we are going to use alpha textures on these. So let's go for 25 leaves. That's obviously not a total of 25 leaves. And if we say 0 on the angle, you can see what that does. They've all sort of tilted up slightly at the moment. And maybe we'll go with -20 for the angle. So there's some of them coming down. And I think I'll go for 30 leaves now, make it even denser. So that'll do for my basic tree. Come back to the main geometry one. At this point, you would want to export your preset. Now, depending on how much of the close trees you're going to see, you may not actually need to create more of them. You can just rotate them and resize them a bit. Select your tree trunk, come over to Curve Options, under Texture Space, and make sure, especially Use UV for Mapping is ticked. As long as it is, that's fine. And we can now Alt-C and say Convert to Mesh from Curve. The leaves are already a mesh, so we can select them, say New Texture, we'll call it Close Leaves, give it a basic green material. I like to give them viewport colors because it just makes it easy to recognize what material or texture you're looking at. And obviously something similar called Bark Close. Just call this one Bark, I think, for the trunk. Before we connect these leaves to the tree, I'm just going to add the Principled shader again. Plug that in there, go to Material. I'm going to add an image texture again, and I'll use this one. I'm not sure if this one has an alpha mask, so let's just take alpha to there and see what happens. It does. If it doesn't, there's some jiggery pokery you can do by creating a mask from the image as long as it's properly set up. So let's take the color into our base color. I have found it more difficult to use transparents with the Principled shader, so I'm just going to add a mix shader, and then I'm going to add transparent shader, take that to the other side of the mix shader, and use the alpha output to control the mix. And as usual, it's the wrong way around, so we'll just swap those two over like that. So you can see we've got our basic leaves there now. We want a reasonably high roughness, but one other thing that I also want to do is add in an add shader, put that there, this side of the translucent mix shader, and add in translucent shader. I imagine you can do that with the Principled shader, but I haven't found the right way to get satisfactory results out of that yet, so I'm going to do it this way. It's more controllable in my view. So I put translucent into one side there, and then I take the color output and put that into the input on the translucent shader. And I'm just going to put the translucent under there. And you can see it brightens it up because now there's a certain amount of light passing through. But we don't want as much light passing through as is reflected. So I'm going to add a gamma node into here and just turn that up. So any light passing through, the colour becomes stronger but slightly darker. Finally, I'm going to add another input, which is object info. And you'll notice on this one, there is a random output. So that gives us a different random number between 0 and 1 for each instance of an object using this material. And we can use that to vary colour slightly. Not between leaves, but between one tree and the next. It could be between leaves if each leaf was an individual object. So I'm going to add colour mix node, pull this one back. I'm going to give this perhaps a slightly green colour. We turn it up to maximum, we've got very light green leaves, but then it's not really mixing the colours now, it's just replacing them. If we try multiply, you can see there's sort of green, or we can try lighten. We can try many of these different mix modes until we get something that we quite like. That made it a slightly greener autumn coloured leaf, but now we control that by connecting this random output into there. Now each time we create an instance of this tree, more or less of that green colour will be mixed in. So finally, we've got the leaf selected, shift right click on the trunk and just say join. So now we have a tree, and I'm just going to create a couple of instances of it, rotate them so we're seeing different parts, change the scale slightly, and I'll just create a few of them. Make that one quite a bit bigger. And I think it's quite nice to sort of try to frame the image, but also to have things which are just out of scene, but creating shadows that reach into it and so on. I'm going to bring the landscape back now. You can see these trees are a bit big for my landscape, even for the close-up trees. So I make them a little smaller, get them to intersect with the ground here. Even now they're still a little large. And what I forgot to do with these trees when I created them was to select a high resolution for the curve, which would have again added a lot more geometry, which isn't necessarily a good thing, but would have made them a little smoother. I can disconnect the leaves and add a subdivision surface if I wanted to. So we'll perhaps lift this tree up a little bit, and let's bring our water back. And you can see we've got a nicely framed scene there, and just a few leaves coming in at the top there. So let's have a look at what we've got so far. One problem I have come across with the latest version of Blender when you join the sapling add-on tree leaves to the trunk is that for some reason it messes up the UV map that was created for those. So that's why we're seeing no leaves here. To fix that, it's relatively straightforward. Bring up the UV image editor, open your image of your leaf, and you see there's a load of dots down here. If you're in edit mode, make sure that your leaves are selected by go to your leaf texture and just say select. in edit mode. Press U, don't unwrap it, but just click reset, and you'll notice they're all squared off here now. And if we now have a look, you can see we've got leaves again. It's just an artifact of how that works. So you can see where they're full white, that means it needs doing for each of those trees. So now when we look at it, you can see our leaves are there. That's all for part 1. In part 2, we'll start creating the particle systems to do things like create the grass and obviously the trees in the distance here. And we'll also create the ivy on this tree here and the rocks in the distance. So I hope you found that interesting. If you did, let me know. If you enjoy these tutorials, don't forget to click like and subscribe. I also have a Facebook page and a Twitter account, and I now have a Patreon page as well. And I'll provide links to all of those in the description below. So I'll see you in the next tutorial. Thanks a lot.